Martin.
Hey, what's going on, Lawrence? How you doing, brother?
Really good. Thanks for making time to have a conversation on racism, love, and hate. I want to introduce you to everybody real quick. Obviously, you're one of my best friends. I wouldn't be the man I am if it wasn't for our friendship. You helped me so much in college. But I had to write this down because I don't want to miss anything because there's a lot behind what you do. You have your master's in counseling psychology. You have your doctorate in educational leadership. Right now, you serve as a dean of students at University City High School. And for those that know, that this is pretty epic because Sam grew up in University City in St. Louis, the same school Nelly went to. And as long as I've known, you've always had a dream to go back to your neighborhood, go back to your school to revolutionize and change the educational system. So you are literally living out your dream and vision.
Yes. Yeah, I feel very honored, man. Since I was about 15 years old, this is what I wanted to do.
Growing up, man, what was your view of white people?
Yeah, grew up in St. Louis, and both my parents did as well. And St. Louis is a historically really a segregated place. And so, I would hear stories from my parents, my mom and my dad about, colored water fountains. You could only sit in certain sections of the movie theater. And so, white folks, it was I heard about white folks at a young age. My parents I don't think it was anything they did out of spite, but just kind of reality. This is kind of how we are, and this is kind of how white folks are. And white folks was really a euphemism, I think, for society. This is kind of how society would view you. If you want to achieve something, you have to be twice as good, right? You have to be aware of where you go when you're in certain places, because your actions will be perceived at a certain way. And this was at a young age. And the community I grew up in, U City, it's a special place. It's home. I love it. But even U City is segregated. It has that St. Louis influence. So in one part of the neighborhood, it's mostly Black for redlining, right? Like my parents, when they moved in 1977, they only got showed homes on a certain side of U City, right? And so the other part of U City is more white, more affluent. And my neighborhood, so like my street, the immediate circle I had, that was mostly Black. There were no white kids in my elementary school. And I had a great experience, but it was definitely different than the world. It's actually what piqued my curiosity about going to a predominantly white university. I was like, I had been around Black folks most of my life. I kind of understood us, but if I want to revolutionize the system, right, like I need to be able to engage with it in a different way. So U City was different in that regard. And so, white people was like the system, was something that I had to learn, but I saw myself as separate from mainstream society in that way. And I felt that from a young age.
So Sam, after leaving St. Louis, you went to the University of Missouri to get your undergraduate degree. Shout out to Mizzou. That's where we met. Fantastic experience. But while you were there, you had a chance to interact with lots of different types of Black people, white, Asians, half Black and half Asian. Can you talk about your cultural experience there and even dating outside your race for a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that exposure is key, right? So, every Black person I had met before college, for the most part, was from St. Louis. It was from the community, right? Like we talked the same, more or less. We were the same. When I met you, you came from Japan, right? Like completely different culture, but you were still Black, right? So I think in my mind, I thought, and I never said this out loud, but I internalized this, that Black was performative. It was something that you performed, right? Like there was this set characteristic or behaviors that you observed that made you Black. And so I really would say, I had some surface level understandings of what it meant to be Black. And I think, although that manifested itself with how I spoke. And so, I was very zealous, as a young college student, but I think that's where that came from. But the University of Missouri, man, 25,000, 30,000 kids was great because I saw not only different types of people, but different types of Black folks as well. Like I met folks from other side of St. Louis. Another one of my good friends from college, he was from another part of St. Louis, South County, which was a part that I had never been to, literally had never been to.
Wow.
Growing up in St. Louis. And he was Black. He played hockey. And he watched Seinfeld, like things I just didn't do. And so I learned that there was diversity, or I got to see and experience diversity in my own culture in a powerful way. My first college roommate, when I tell people this, they can't believe it, but I was the first real live Black person that he ever met. Like, he had met like at the store and stuff like that, but like an intimate relationship, like I was the first. He was from this little small town outside of a small town in Missouri. Like he lived in a farm. And when people, I tell people that, I say I was the first real live Black person he got to meet. They're like, oh my gosh, like how was it? How was he? And he was so open-minded. His parents were like hippies. His parents were actually grew up in St. Louis, and they bought a farm to raise their kids. And he was kind of a hippie too. He dropped out of college to be a whitewater river rafting instructor.
There we go.
But I think in situations like that helped me. And, with the young lady, it was funny because I was so wrapped up in like loving my culture and just kind of being obsessed with my culture at times that I didn't see myself in an amorous relationship with, somebody that was outside of my culture. And I remember, I'm kind of hanging out, with this girl, just being friends. And I had people like, man, you like her. And I'm like, no, I don't. Like, I can't. Like, I only like Black girls. I like dark sisters, man. Like, right? Like, this is not my type. But all of my actions, right, were I was drawn to her. And I remember when it kind of hit me, I was riding with actually my best friend from St. Louis, man, that I grew up with. We were actually on our way to a Cardinals game. And we're riding down, the highway. And I say, hey, man, I want to ask you about something. It's like, man, I'm talking to a white girl. Like, what do you think? And I'll never forget, because he looked at me. This is a guy who grew up in the same community, right, with the same kind of, factors I talk about. And he says, man, people are people.
Wow.
And that was kind of it. And then we went to the game. But it just resonated with me that people are people. And, I thought to myself, like, man, if this girl was Black, like I wouldn't have had an issue with it. I wouldn't have felt funny about it. Like, why do I feel funny about it now? And it let me know that, even though, I could fight and want to work against prejudice in other people, like, man, I had some stuff that I need to work on in my own heart. And so, so I did, Dave. I mean, a couple months, wasn't deep. Thank God we broke up. I think we're both now. Certainly love my wife and the life I have now. But I think that moment, yeah, it was on one hand, it's kind of funny, but I think, it really impacted me, and it showed me that, man, I got work to do. And so it just really made me want to up my game for loving people and building with people, no matter where they come from.
How do you love people different from you?
I think for me, man, I have to be purposeful, man. There was a young lady that I went to, I was involved in my campus ministry in college. There was a young lady who, I don't know, man, we just didn't get along. Like I used to tease her, probably a little bit more mean-spirited than I needed to be. And it just wasn't right. And, I got challenged by a brother. He's like, man, you got to work on your relationship with this person. And so, and I don't know if he told me this or if I took this on my own, but I remember praying this prayer. I said, God, I pray to see in this person what you see. Your son died on the cross for this person. I want to see what he sees when I look at this person. And when I did that, it really changed. That prayer not only changed my heart towards this sister, but I think it changed my heart towards people in general. And so, I can see the beauty and humanity in everybody. And I really challenge myself to do that. And so that really governs my day-to-day interactions with folks. I think it's more challenging when I view systems, right? Because I don't, like history has taught me not to trust systems, but people, relationships.
Mm.
Certainly, I want to see the God in them
Mm.
and connect with the God in them.
That's a powerful prayer. How are you feeling about what's going on in the world as far as racism, Black culture, and as a father, like how are you dealing with that at parenting your kids?
I wouldn't say that it's more intense now. I just think the world is smaller now. And so we hear about more things now. Again, like before social media, 30 years ago, if something happened in Miami, like I would have no way of knowing. If something happened in Minneapolis, I'd have no way of knowing. But now with social media, news travels fast, right? And sometimes it's not news, just information travels fast. The pain that Black folks have felt like, in my lifetime through these events, like I felt, and it's not like, the pain with Floyd's death was more painful than, Trayvon or any of these other deaths that happened, or Mike Brown, who, from St. Louis.
Yeah.
It's that what's interesting to me is that other people are aware of the pain. And so what I'm used to, just as a Black male, to be frank, is that the Black experience is something that's insular, right? Like these hardships or, experiences are something that really we only commune with each other about. Mm. That's what I'm used to. But, at the barbershop or, the basketball court, kind of wherever you spend your informal space, right? And with my family. But I've had more non-Black folks reach out to me or want to converse about what's going on in the world. And I think that's really unique. I think it's given me a glimpse into what humanity could be, right? Like if we actually converse with one another and we empathize with one another. And so out of that, I think out of the darkness and the tragedy of what's happening, that's one thing that I use to, that encourages me about what's been happening. And it's tough as a father, man. So I have 2 kids. I have one kid that's a lot like me, very aware of race, his identity, the history of his people. He's 8. And then I have a daughter who's kind of like indifferent. And so my son, he asks a lot of great questions and we have a lot of great conversations. Actually, for the past few months, he's been asking me to watch the movie Harriet. It came out last year.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, man, I had zero interest in watching Harriet. I know the history. And so for me, traumatic may be too much of a word, but I don't like the experience of watching stories that I know how they end, right? I watched Roots when I was actually about his age. And I asked my grandmother. I had a conversation with my grandmother. She's 95 now. But I had a conversation with my grandma. I said, Granny, have you ever seen Roots? And she said, oh, baby, I don't watch those movies.
I lived through it.
It's from my grandparents. She's like, I don't need to watch the movie. And, I looked up to my grandma and we had a lot of conversations about race and that sort of thing. And when she said that, the more I read, the more books the more conversations I had, I understood that. And so I don't watch those movies. Amistad, 12 Years a Slave. Like I don't watch those movies, but I wanted, for my son, I wanted to watch the movie. And so we watch it. And it was challenging, man, because you see this depiction of how Black folks have been treated. And of course, me understanding systemic racism and knowing how these interactions impact and influence our culture and society today. It was challenging, but there was this moment in the movie, because it's real. One of the white folks in the movie referred to a slave as a nigger. He's like, "Come here, nigger." And my son, we're watching, and you watch movies. You ask, oh, "What does that mean?" or "What's happening?" So my son asked me, 8 years old. He said, "Daddy, what's a nigger?" Wow. And who's like, because I have an understanding of that being just living in America, right? And then how to explain that for an 8-year-old to make it real and since it's a movie and this is in real time. So I told him, I said, hey, it's actually that's a phrase or a word that was used to degrade Black folks in its time. And so after we watched the movie, me and my son, we do these daily walks. And so it's like after this, we already walked this morning, but let's walk in the evening and talk about the movie. And so we walk and we're talking. And so I started talking about that word and how it was used to devalue the Black experience. And he said to me, I said, son, people thought back then that, Black folks weren't smarter. Like that, when I tell you about reading, I was like, it was actually illegal for slaves to read. And his mind is blown, excuse me, because, he's brilliant. He's like, people thought Black people weren't smart. Like he couldn't believe it, and it's interesting because, hate is really learned, man. Those prejudices and biases are really learned. Because in a lot of ways, my son's not perfect, obviously, but man, he's pure in regards to this race. And so it reminded me of the responsibility I have as a parent to be able to educate and inform. Like I have to teach him about what the word nigger is before the world teaches him. Yeah. I have to teach him, and which I have been, but I have to continue to teach him about what it means to be a Black male before the world does. I have to teach him about the Black experience before the world does. I have to teach him about how we love and how we treat not only Black folks, but people from all backgrounds before the world does.
Praise men like you, fathers that are involved. And my heart breaks for those who don't have a father in a home that can have these conversations, have these walks, and teach their children how to be, and especially with difficult situations like racism. So what's your favorite scripture or story in the Bible that inspires you to love more and deeper?
Yeah, man, Jesus was amazing, man, like with relationships. And so, man, probably my favorite story is actually scripture is the shortest one in the Bible, man. So like Jesus wept because if you're familiar, the story of Lazarus. Lazarus has died, and Jesus going to see about the situation. I don't know when he made the decision that he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead, but he goes, and then the sisters are kind of, Jesus, if you were here, he wouldn't have died. The first sister says. Then the second sister says, Jesus, if you were here, he wouldn't have died. And he looks at all these people mourning. And I think at this time he knows, that the Bible doesn't really say, but I think he knows that he's going to perform this miracle with Lazarus. But the people are sad. And Jesus still goes there with them in their sadness. It's like he sees them mourning and he mourns with them. And I think for me, even though, the ultimate miracle for me as a Christian is being in heaven, right? Yeah. There's a lot of sadness that I experience here. And Jesus feels that sadness with me. He doesn't abandon us, in difficult times, hard times, trying times. And I think for me, it's just an example of his compassion that really resonated with me as a young man, and resonates with me now, that he's there to feel what I feel, to connect with me wherever I am, good or bad. Like we know it's easy to connect with the good, but especially the bad. He's right there. And he'll still perform the miracle.
True. That's true, because he could have just healed her right away.
Right away.
He wept, he had compassion, he had empathy, and then healed him.
Yeah, I think about how I am with my kids. Like I try to fix it now. Yeah. Actually sit in the sadness for a little bit. It's a different type of connection. Then we get to a solution. But yeah, Jesus was amazing in that way.
But Sam, man, dude, bro, thanks for your time, for sharing. I love your heart, your insights. I love what you're doing as a dad. I love what you're doing for your community. Dude, you're a hero on many levels, and you're an inspiration to me and many of our friends that we grew up with. So yeah, bro, we're really proud of you.